This is an introduction to this account of things that have delighted me, and I call it the Grumbler's Apology. I've always been a grumbler. All the records, going back to earliest childhood, establish this fact. Probably I arrived here a malcontent, convinced that I'd been sent to the wrong planet, and I feel even now there is something in this. I was designed for the part, for I have a sagging face, a weighty underlip, what I am told is a saurian eye, and a rumbling but resonant voice from which it's difficult to escape. Money couldn't buy a better grumbling outfit. In the West Riding of Yorkshire, where I spent my first 19 years, all local customs and prejudices favour the grumbler. To a good West Riding type, there is something shameful about praise, but fault-finding and blame are constant and heavy. The edge of criticism up there is sharpened every morning. So the twilight of Victoria and the brief but golden afternoon of Edward VII discovered Jackie Priestley grumbling away, a novice of course, but learning fast. A short spell of the wool trade, and in no trade do you hear more complaints and bitter murmurs, developed my technique. Then came the First World War, in which I served with some of the dourest, unwearying grumblers that even the British Army has ever known, and was considered to hold my own with the best of them. After that, a rapidly ripening specimen, I grumbled my way through Cambridge, Fleet Street, and various fields of literary and dramatic enterprise. I've grumbled all over the world, across seas, on mountains, in deserts. I've grumbled as much at home as abroad, and so I've been the despair of my women folk. Not that they've ever understood what I was up to. We've always been at cross purposes here. The feminine view appears to be that grumbling only makes things worse, whereas I've always held that a fine grumble makes things better. If, for example, an hotel gives me a bad breakfast, I've only to grumble away for a few minutes to feel that some reasonable balance has been restored. The grumble has been subtracted from the badness of the breakfast. So it's no use crying to me, "Oh, do be quiet, it's bad enough without your grumbling." My mind doesn't move along those lines. If I haven't had a good breakfast, I argue, at least I've had a good grumble. Thus I've always been innocent of the major charge, that of trying deliberately to make things worse. Another point for the defence is that I've always looked and sounded much worse than I've felt. When I'm displeased, but not when I'm pleased, I gather, for some reason still hidden from me, I tend to overact my part. Often when I'm feeling merely annoyed, a little put out, I appear to be blazingly angry or lost in the deepest sulks. The appearance is larger than the reality, and I've suffered much from this suggestion of the theatre or the public platform in my private behaviour. Time and again, my real feelings have been misinterpreted. I may not have been enjoying myself, but at least I've not been suffering as intensely as the rest of the company imagined. When rehearsals are going badly, I'm often rushed out of the theatre, given drinks, flattered, cajoled, simply to keep me out of sight of the players, those pampered creatures. Once, years ago, at a large party, when I was grumbling as usual, a young woman who was a stranger to me turned on me fiercely and told me I'd better go home instead of trying to spoil other people's pleasure. I was taken aback, and may be said to have stayed aback ever since. So, this little collection of delights must be my bit of penitence for having grumbled so much, for having darkened the breakfast table, almost ruined the lunch, nearly silenced the dinner party, for all the fretting and chafing, grousing and croaking, for all the old glum look and the thrust-out lower lip. So may a glimmer of that delight which has so often possessed me, but perhaps too frequently in secret, now reach you from these talks. Fountains. I doubt if I ever saw one, even the smallest, without some tingling of delight. They enchant me in the daytime, when the sunlight ennobles their jets and sprays and turns their scattered drops into diamonds. They enchant me after dark when coloured lights are played on them and the night rains emeralds, rubies, sapphires. And best of all, when the last colour is whisked away and there they are in a dazzling white glory. The richest memory I have of the Bradford exhibition of my boyhood, better than even the water shoot or the Somali village or the fireworks, is of the fairy fountain which changed colour to the waltzes of the Blue Hungarian band and was straight out of the Arabian Nights. And I believe my delight in these magical jets of water, the invention of which does credit to our whole species, is shared by 99 persons out of every 100. But where are they, these fountains we love? We hunger for them and aren't fed. A definite issue could be made out of this, beginning with letters to the Times, continuing with meetings and unanimous resolutions and deputations to Downing Street, and ending, if necessary, with processions and mass demonstrations and some rather ugly scenes. What's the use of our being told that we live in a democracy if we want fountains and have no fountains? Expensive? Their cost is trifling compared to that of so many idiotic things we are given and don't want. Our towns are crammed with all manner of rubbish that no people in their senses ever asked for. Yet where are the fountains? By all means, let us have a policy of full employment, increased production, no gap between exports and imports, social security, a balance this and a plan that. But let us also have fountains, more and more fountains, higher and higher fountains, fountains like wine, like blue and green fire, fountains like diamonds and rainbows in every square. Crazy? Probably. But what with hot wars and cold wars, we've already tried going drearily mad. Why not try going delightfully mad? Why not stop spouting ourselves and let it be done for us by graceful fountains, exquisite fountains, beautiful fountains? Orchestral conductors. Ah, the conductors. When I was a boy, massive old Richter commanding the massive old Halle Orchestra. Then that night, when it was as if electricity had just been discovered, Nikish arrived with the London Symphony, a man in a tranced white passion. Or the noble silvery Bruno Walter, transmuting Wagner into sunlight, green leaves, birdsong. The first amazed hearing of Toscanini and his New York Philharmonic, with everything at once solid and soaring, mathematics and magic. Tommy Beecham dueling for Mozart with a glittering rapier, and the enraptured De Sabater taking the whole London Philharmonic with him up the steps to Beethoven's heaven, and there frenziedly beating with his fists upon the vast invisible doors. Why, my dear maestros, in spite of wars, bombs, taxes, rubbish and all, what a delight it has been to share this world and this age with you. Smell of Tahiti. Our noses can do it for us. You turn into some side street where they're roasting coffee in the morning, or you pass a baker's on a winter's night, and immediately you nose out delight. But perhaps the most satisfying and also the most romantic smell is that of earth itself. That time, for instance, when we were approaching Tahiti. We'd sailed from San Francisco in an old New Zealand mail steamer, whose captain, duly determined to entertain his passengers, used to read to us jokes and riddles from his favourite Wellington weekly. Soon we lost the earth, for the Pacific Ocean is even larger than it appears to be on the map. We saw no land, no passing ships, and even the seabirds vanished. For days we appeared to be cutting our way through purple-black marble, thinly veined with foam. After that the sun of the accursed ancient mariner glared down on us, set up noons of hot brass, and drained our hollow globe of all colour. As we crossed the equator, I took to shivering, as if lost in some sudden little winter of my own. My temperature jumped to 105. I departed for delirium, and then returning to the ship, existed shakily on jugs of iced orangeade and tinned asparagus, which I've never tasted since without a shudder of the palate. When I was allowed on deck again, it was only to discover that nothing had changed except our position on the map. There were the sun, the dissolving blues, and melting meaningless distances, the mild waste of waters. Earth might have gone forever. Perhaps there were no people left alive except ourselves. We were churning our way out of time itself. We had joined the Flying Dutchman with not even a riddle left from the Wellington Weekly. This wasn't a voyage, but another life, gradually thinning out into a long, vague dream. And then it happened, without anybody warning us. There was nothing to see, not even a thickening of the southern horizon. It was our noses that discovered the coming landfall. No doubt this smell that brought us such delight was compounded of copra, decayed fish, frangipani and vanilla, oil and sweat, stew and fries, dung and blossom. But there it was, this earth of ours, and while we hung eagerly over the rails, sniffing away, seeing nothing, hearing nothing, our happy noses already began to land on the South Sea Isles. Smoking in a hot bath. Yes, lying in a hot bath, smoking a pipe. And the Emperor Elagabalus himself, after driving his white horses through the gold-dusted streets of Rome, never knew anything better, nor indeed anything as good, not having either pipe or tobacco. People still say to me, "The way you work," and behind the modest smirk, I laugh secretly, knowing myself to be one of the laziest and most self-indulgent men alive. Long after they have caught the 8:20, opened the morning mail, telephoned to the managing director of the cement company, dictated yet another appeal to the Board of Trade, I'm lying in my hot bath, smoking a pipe. I'm not even soaping and scrubbing, but simply lying there like a pink porpoise, puffing away. In a neighbouring room, thrown on the floor, the morning papers, loud with more urgent demands for increased production, clamouring for every man and woman to save the country. And there I am, lost in steam, the fumes of Latakia, and the vaguest dreams. Just beyond the bolted door, where the temperature drops to nearly freezing point, are delicate women who've been already up for hours, toiling away. And do I care? Not a rap. Sometimes I pretend, just to test the credulity of the household, that I'm planning my day's work, but I'm doing nothing of the kind. Often I don't intend to do any work at all during the day, and even when I know I must do some, I couldn't possibly plan it in or out of a bath. No, I'm just lying there, a pampered slug, with my saurian little eyes half closed, cancelling the ice ages, lolling again in the steamy hot morning of the world's time, wondering dimly what is happening to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, one of the most energetic and prolific of our authors. Virtue. Not going. One of the delights known to age, and beyond the grasp of youth, is that of not going. When we're young, it's almost agony not to go. We feel we're being left out of life, that the whole wonderful procession is sweeping by, probably forever, while we are weeping or sulking behind bars. Not to have an invitation for the dance, the party, the match, the picnic, the excursion, the gang on holiday, is to diminish, perhaps kept at midget's height for years. To have an invitation and then not to be able to go, oh, cursed spite. Thus we torment ourselves in the April of our time. Now in my early November, not only do I not care the rottenest fig whether I receive an invitation or not, but after having carelessly accepted the invitation, I can find delight in knowing that I'm not going. I arrived at this by two stages. At the first, after years of illusion, I finally decided I was missing nothing by not going. Now, at the second and I hope final stage, I stay away and no longer care whether I'm missing anything or not. But don't I like to enjoy myself? On the contrary, by not going, that is just what I'm trying to do. Blossom. Yes, blossom in the sun. Apple, pear, cherry, plum, almond blossom. Up in the dales, when I was a child. In Picardy, among the ruin of war. Afterwards at Cambridge and among the Chilterns, where I would read my publisher's manuscripts and review copies in their delicate shade. At the bottom of the canyons, at Bright Angel and Oak Creek in Arizona. Here in our garden in the Isle of Wight. So many places, so much time. And yet after 50 years, this delight in the foaming branches is unchanged. I believe that if I lived to be 1,000 and were left with some glimmer of eyesight, this delight would remain. If only we could clean off the world from this earth. But at least once every spring on a fine morning, that's what we seem to do, as we stare again at the blossom and are back in Eden. We complain and complain, but we have lived, and we've seen the blossom, apple, pear, cherry, plum, almond blossom, there in the sun, and the best among us can't pretend they deserve or could contrive anything better. Wood. I'm not as clumsy with my hands as many bookish men I know, but I've never had any training or practice in handicrafts, and apart from sawing and splitting logs and knocking a nail in here and there, I've had little to do with wood. Yet I never go where wood is being worked, never stand near a joiner, carpenter, or cabinet maker without feeling at least a tickle of delight. To handle newly planed wood, even to look at it or smell it, is to receive a message that life can still be in good heart. The very shavings are a crisp confirmation. Now there's a mystery here. Atavism will not explain it. Our remoter ancestors, winding back into the mists, were chippers of stone. I've seen their flints inside and outside museums, and have never yet felt a quiver of sympathy. Woodwork as we know it, needing sharp metal tools, must be one of man's newer activities. Is this perhaps the secret? Is this stuff still so excitingly new? But light alloys and plastics are newer still, the discoveries of today, and yet no message comes from them. Is it because wood, no matter how chopped and trimmed and planed, somehow remains alive? I put my hand on the desk on which I've been writing, and it's almost as if my palm fell on the shoulder of a brother. Into this patient material of past rain and sun, steely mornings in March, the glow of October, it has lived as some secret part of us still lives. And notice how few men who work with wood seem unhappy, defeated. When we write a book about a carpenter, we call it the New Testament. No school report. We fathers of families have one secret little source of delight that's closed to other men. As we read the school reports upon our children, we realize with a sense of relief that can rise to delight that, thank heaven, nobody's reporting in this fashion upon us. What a nightmare it would be if our personalities were put through this mincing machine. I can imagine my own report. Height and weight, beginning of term, 5 feet 9 inches, 13 stone, 10 pounds. At end of term, 5 feet 8 inches, 14 stone, 2 pounds. Note, through greed and lack of exercise, J.B. is putting on weight and is sagging. He must get out more and eat and drink less. Conduct, not satisfactory. J.B. is increasingly irritable, inconsiderate, and uncooperative. He is inclined to blame others for faults in himself. He complains of lack of sleep, but persists in remaining awake to finish rubbishy detective stories. He smokes far too much, and on several occasions has been discovered smoking in bed. There is no real harm in him, but at the present time he tends to be self-indulgent, lazy, vain and touchy. He should be encouraged to spend some weeks this summer with the Sea Scouts or at a harvest camp. English language and literature, fair but inclined to be careless. French, a disappointing term. History has not made the progress here that we expected of him. Should read more. Mathematics, very poor. Art has made some attempt both at oils and watercolour, but shows little aptitude. Has been slack in his appreciation and did not attend Miss Mulberry's excellent talks on the Italian primitives. Music, fair but will not practice. Natural history, still professes an interest but finds it impossible to remember names of birds, butterflies, flowers. Has not joined in the rambles this term. Chemistry, clearly has no interest in this subject. Physics, poor, though occasionally shows interest, fails to comprehend basic laws. Physical culture, Sergeant Beefer reports that J.B. has been frequently absent and is obviously far from keen, a bad term. General report, J.B. is not the bright and helpful member of our little community that he once promised to be. He lacks self-discipline and doesn't try to cultivate a cheery outlook. There are times when he still exerts himself. For example, he made a useful contribution to the end-of-term production of A Comedy of Errors, but he tends to be lazy and egoistical. His housemaster has had a talk with him, but I suggest that stronger parental guidance would be helpful and is indeed necessary. And then I would be asked to see my father, and would find him staring and frowning at this report, and then he would stare and frown at me, and would begin asking me in his deep and rather frightening voice what on earth was the matter with me. But it can't happen, not this side of the grave. I am knee-deep in the soggy world of greying hair and rotting teeth, of monstrous taxes and overdrafts, of vanishing friends and fading sight. But at least I can tell myself delightedly, nobody is writing a school report upon me. Long trousers. There was a time when merely wearing long trousers brought me delight. In those days, when I must have been about 15, I had only one suit, my best, with long trousers. My other suits had knee breeches, buttoning tightly just below the knee and worn with thick long stockings turned down at the top. There was really nothing wrong with my appearance when I wore these knee breeches and long stockings, for after years of football I had muscular, well-shaped legs. But whenever I wore them, I felt I was still imprisoned, a shamefaced giant, in the stale miniature world of childhood. Condemned, and I use this term because there were strict rules at home about which suits could be worn. To wear these knee breeches, I felt that no glimpse of my real self could catch the town's eye. I might almost have been sent to school in a pram. Conversely, I felt that as soon as I put on the long trousers, then appearance and reality were gloriously one. I joined the world of men, and even without doing anything more than wear these trousers, and leaving the other wretched things at home, I could feel my whole nature expanding magnificently. On the occasional days when I was allowed to wear the adult trousers to go to school, I almost floated there. Never did 18 inches of cloth do more for the human spirit. And on those mornings now when I seem to stare sullenly at the wreck of a shining world, why don't I remind myself that although I grow old and fat and peevish, at least I am wearing my long trousers. Pleasure and gratitude of children. I doubt if there's anything in my life that I regret more bitterly than I do my frequent failure as a boy to bring delight to my parents by showing them how pleased I was. Time after time, I realize now, I must have brought them bewilderment, dismay, and aching disappointment by failing to respond adequately to some treat they planned for me. When, for example, they took me to London and to the Franco-British exhibition. What a misery I must have been. There's always been in me a little devil, or if you prefer it, a perverse rather than boorish streak, that won't allow me to show pleasure when it's expected of me. The moment of unwrapping the present, of responding to congratulations, of seeing at last what has been so lovingly planned and carried out for me, always finds me staring out of a pewter-coloured eye, frowning, hesitant, mumbling, blankly unappreciative. I can light up at some unexpected bit of nonsense, often at the smallest attention, but at the appointed and long-expected hour, when the least quiver on my face is of some significance, I flop heavily. And the worst victims of any such inadequacy or perversion are parents. I know that now, being a parent myself, although my children are far more responsive than I ever was. I understand now how easily I could have delighted my own parents. For to show a child what has once delighted you, to find the child's delight added to your own, so that there's now a double delight seen in the glow of trust and affection, this is happiness. I'd rather see one of my children's faces kindle at the sight of the quay at Calais than be offered the chance of exploring by myself the palaces of Peking. How good it is to recapture old and fast-fading delights, to see them anew through love, and to find them sparkling and glowing now like jewels. The mineral water in the bedrooms of foreign hotels. I get enormous delight from drinking mineral water in the bedrooms of foreign hotels, especially in France and Italy, where I eat far too much, take more wine than agrees with me, and so soon exist in a surfeited livery condition, am yawny, headachy, and in a torment of thirst. How delightful, then, to escape from the cathedrals and art galleries, the laborious encounters with distinguished foreign colleagues, to take off one's coat and shoes in the plushy hermitage of the bedroom, and to receive from the waiter a bottle, fresh off the ice, of whatever brand of eau minerale they fancy round there. It will have been awarded gold medals and diplomas. It will attempt to cure rheumatism, catarrh of the stomach, urinary complaints, obesity and gout, gravel and stone. It is recommended by doctors who look like Dode and Zola characters. But not only is it good, this mineral water, any brand, it is also beautiful. It gurgles out of its green bottle like a chill and sparkling mountain spring, and arrives in the furred desert of my throat like a benediction. And as I sit there in my shirt sleeves and socks, swilling it down, knowing that rheumatism, catarrh of the stomach, urinary complaints, obesity and gout, gravel and stone are now being sharply challenged, I forgive my fellow men, no matter how bearded and incomprehensible, and think much better of myself and of life in this world. Orchestras tuning up. We're told that some Oriental visitor, attending one of our symphony concerts for the first time, was particularly delighted by what he thought was the opening piece on the program, the sound of the orchestra tuning up. But I'm not sure that he was wrong. Is there, in fact, anything more delightful in all the symphonies, concertos, and tone poems that follow than this anonymous opening piece, so enormous in its promise, so cunningly anticipatory of the best of what is to come? What else that we hear during the evening takes such a hold on the imagination? It is, if you like, a chaos, this tuning up and trying the instrument and having a go at the difficult bit, noise. But it's a chaos caught at the supreme moment, immediately before creation. Everything of order and beauty shortly to be revealed is already there in it. Moreover, it never fails us, unlike some of the compositions that will follow it. We never find ourselves groaning over its interminable slow movements, its tedious crescendos. It's never pretentious, never bogus. It is as delightful, crammed with as much promise, the 100th time we hear it as it was the first. And indeed, I think it grows on us. Moreover, it belongs to all schools, smiling at old Haydn and yet nodding to Schoenberg, and so is always in fashion. All the instruments, from the piccolo to the contrabassoon, play their parts in it, and it conducts itself and asks for no applause. Is there a good gramophone record of it? If so, my birthday is the 13th of September. The delight that never was. Yes, the secret dream, the hunger that can never be fed. Now, all my adult life, I've been more or less a leftish intellectual. I've tried to make myself and other people aware of the harsh economic and industrial realities of our time. Again and again I've taken my notebooks and typewriter to the factories, the mines, the steel mills. I denounced or jeered at those colleagues who wouldn't look. I wrote some of the first detailed accounts of the depressed areas. Having been brought up on the edge of it, I knew what life was like years ago back of the mill. I didn't discover the proletariat at Oxford or Cambridge, for the West Riding working class was in my blood and bones. I grew up among socialists. I watched the smoke thicken and the millionaires who made it ride away. I saw broken old women creep back to the mills and young men wither because there was no work for them to do and nobody wanted them. I knew the saddest waste of all, the waste of human beings. If socialism was the way out, then socialism we must have. If it meant more and more bigger factories, then we must have more and more bigger factories. If it meant larger and larger cities, more and more bungalows, cinemas, football grounds, greyhound tracks, motor roads, personal appearances of film stars, boards and committees, hostels, organizations for the right use of leisure, clinics, identity cards, radio night and day in every home, press offices and propaganda, party bosses arranging all our lives. Very well, we had to have them. At the worst, they were still better than the grey misery I'd seen, the deep cancer of injustice. But there was never anything here for my own secret delight, nothing for the hunger of the heart. Perhaps for all my pretense of being up to the minute, I wasn't even living in the right age, and when I looked for my own enduring delight, I became an anachronism. When I caught myself off guard, last thing at night after too long a day, huddled in a train and too tired to read, coming out of a dress rehearsal into a wet Sunday midnight in Manchester or Sheffield, I'd remember what I wanted, and it was always something quite different from what we were all demanding. Sometimes it seemed as if the capital of a tiny German dukedom round about 1830 was nearer to my desire than anything my friends were planning or that I could help to bring into this world. I wanted a place with the dignity and style of a city, but reasonably small and clean, with genuine country only half an hour's walk from its centre, its single but superb theatre, its opera house, its symphony orchestra, its good restaurant always filled with friends. One little civilized place full of persons, with no nameless mob, no huge machinery of publicity, no glaring metropolis. To be myself in this one dear place, with a position as comfortable as an old slipper, in a tiny, sensible society, and not a caricature of myself in several continents. To come out of a late rehearsal and smell the lilac. To have a play done as well as it could be done by tried colleagues, by friends, in the one familiar theatre, and not indifferently produced in 100 different theatres for large sums of money hastily removed from me by accountants and tax collectors. Not to be caught up and lost in the machinery of existence, as most of us are now, but to live simply and directly, like an artist, a philosopher, and in such a way that feeling, thought, action were always closely allied, and last year's inspiration would be this year's achievement. No rushing about, no long-distance telephone calls, no expensive mountebanking, no losing touch with friends and admired colleagues, no running a career as if it were a damn great factory. Everything small but of fine quality, cosily within reach, and means and ends in sight of each other. Pokey and provincial? Why, almost all the world's best work has been done in these conditions. Think of Athens, Florence, Elizabethan London, Weimar. And what has come out of Megapolis but rubbish and hysteria? But if I should be told, and my candid friends will be onto it before you can say knife, that now there can never be such a place outside a daydream left over from adolescence, then I can only nod and look away. but perhaps something like it, at least more like it than what we... Oh, no, I see. Fall in, comrades, quick march. But one of us, as we go, still hugs the notion of something quite different, the delight that never was on sea or land. And this is where we came in. When we come to die, dear listener, we shall either fall asleep forever or leave this life for some other existence. Now, for many a year, one of the best pleasures of the day for me has been its last, this drifting away from consciousness, sinking into sleep, all the more welcome to me because often I don't fall asleep easily. Again, I've always been delighted at the prospect of a new day, a fresh try, one more start, with perhaps a bit of magic waiting somewhere behind the morning. And as I'm not good enough for heaven, nor bad enough for hell, the territory and company in between oughtn't to be too disturbingly unfamiliar. So either way, it ought to be all right, and there's no reason why I should be afraid. And indeed, though often timid as a hare, shrinking from dogs, horses, rough bathing, doubtful aircraft, I don't think I am much afraid of death. But of course that black velvet curtain of his has to be hanging at the end of the corridor, so that every gleam of delight along there is easier to see. For instance, fountains. I doubt if I ever saw one, even the smallest, without some tingling of delight. But this is where we came in.